All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. How are you all? Good. Great. Can you guys hear me okay in the back? Not too bad. Okay, very good. Well done on your Saturday choices. Applauding you all for choosing to be here with us this afternoon. It's a beautiful afternoon, and we're just so thrilled to have a big crowd to welcome Robert Hass back to Tucson. We've had a great visit with both Robert Hass and Brenda Hillman, a terrific reading on Thursday night. That was marvelous from Brenda. So she set a high bar for the love of her life, and we're very excited to hear from Bob today. My name is Tyler Meyer. I work as the executive director here at the Poetry Center, and the Poetry Center is beloved by many and very close to my heart. It takes a lot of energy to have a center thrive the way this one has. And in my life, that requires support from my family and the people around me. So I'm really excited. I have a wife who's a teacher who's busy every Thursday night with our kids. And so she lets me come here and do the work with the readings, but she's here on a Saturday. So this is my wife, Katie. And I love you. She's embarrassed. So it's a team sport, and I'm happy to be on that team. There are two readings coming up in the month of February that I want to keep everyone in the loop about. Our next reading here in the center will be back on Thursday nights. It's at 7 o'clock, and it's a 20th anniversary reading and celebration of the program Letras Latinas. And so we're thrilled to be in partnership with Letras Latinas. They're doing events all over the country. The program that we'll have here is going to feature 3 poets, Gina Franco, Edgar Garcia, and Sheila Maldonado. And then we'll be hosted by an associate of Letras Latinas, Laura Villarreal. We're so thrilled that that's happening here and that we're a part of celebrating the work that Letras Latinas has done over the past 20 years. So please come back for that. Should be a wonderful evening. That's Thursday night, the 22nd at 7 o'clock back here at the Poetry Center. Then on the 29th, this is one of those years where we get a February 29th. We have a reading from the poet Matthew Zapruder, who returns back to Tucson. And his book, his new memoir, it was just shortlisted for the National Book Critics Circle Award. It's terrific. It's called The Story of a Poem. And he'll be back reading from that book, I think, and also from his poetry. So those are what's coming up in February. We hope to see you back there for both of those events. I also just want to quickly mention that we have a really exciting partnership with the College of Science in the month of February. They annually do their College of Science lecture series, presenting researchers and the work that the researchers are doing for the general public in Tucson. Those happen on Wednesday nights in the month of February at Centennial Hall. They're free and open to the public. And this partnership that we have, we've paired a poet with each of the lectures from the scientists. And we're really pleased to have that invitation and to bring poetry into the science spaces where they live naturally, but also we sometimes forget, and so we reinsert. So the first reader in that will be on February 7th. The topic is on research in black holes, and the poet is our own Julie Swarstad Johnson from the Poetry Center. Later in the month, we'll hear from the poets Bojan Lewis, Allison Hawthorne Deming, and Catherine Larson, and we're really excited about that. So come see us at the College of Science Lecture Series as well. All of these events, the College of Science events, that's on their website. The poetry events is on our information on our website. This calendar, which is available around the corner, will tell you all about it. So if you don't have one of these and want to know what's coming up and how you can participate, this is what you need, and we'll be happy to share them with you. And so you can find them right around the corner after the reading. Conveniently, right next to it are the books that are for sale. So if you've brought any extra dollars in your pocket, this is a great time to spend them. And I'm sure that Robert Hass would be willing to come up and sign and speak with you after the reading. And so I hope you'll take advantage of that opportunity. To help welcome our visiting poet, I want to welcome up a great friend of the Poetry Center, former Poetry Center director, a Regents Professor Emeritus here at the University of Arizona, Allison Hawthorne Deming, author of 2 forthcoming books in the next year, editor of one, the editor of the anthology, The Gift of Animals, a celebration of animals and the people who love them. So a book about the creatures of our world and poems that describe them and bring them to life in language. And then a new poetry collection, Blue Flax and the Yellow Mustard Seed. Please help me welcome Allison Hawthorne Deming. Thanks. As always, good to see you.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. I hope you can hear me okay. in the hinterlands? Okay. It is an honor and pleasure to introduce Robert Hass. I found his work early in my writing life, discovering in his poems something I had been searching for without knowing what exactly that was. It had something to do with marrying the intimacy of the practice of poetry with attending to the world beyond the self. Something to do with being a citizen in the art. Something about savoring life while bearing witness to its anguish. I've held poems from each of his books as talismans, works that strengthened my belief in the necessity and beauty of this strange and quiet art form in which we all have found something of a home. Field Guide came out in 1973. Stanley Kunitz, who had selected the book for the Yale Younger Poets Award, wrote, "Some poems present themselves as cliffs that need to be climbed. Others are so defensive that when you approach their enclosure, you half expect to be met by a snarling dog at the gate." Reading a poem by Robert Hass is like stepping into the ocean when the temperature of the water is not much different from that of the air. You scarcely know until you feel the undertow tug at you, that you have entered into another element. Suddenly, the deep is there with its teeming life. The poem that got to me from that book, well, of course, Palo Alto, the marshes with its acute observation of nature, interlaced with the bitter history and menacing sense of the future that dwell in any American place. But really, the poem that got me was Lament for the Poles of Buffalo, which may be prophetic in his long friendship with the great Polish poet, Czeslaw Milosz. That sequence was written when Hass was teaching in a night school during the Cambodian escalation of the Vietnam War. His students, Polish working class people who were displaced from their homeland, as Hass was at the time displaced from his California homeland. Here was a poem of political urgency, of longing for a place of belonging, and of literary resonance as the night school instructor brings the works of Polish poets to the citizens who have lost touch with their roots. It's a brilliant poem, and yes, easy to settle into, taking on such ambitious subject matter without pretense or posturing, only empathy. From Hass's second book, Praise, the poem I have held, or that has held me, is, of course, if you know his work, Meditation at Lagunitas, with its unforgettable opening. All the new thinking is about loss. In this, it resembles all the old thinking. And its delicious last line, saying, blackberry, 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 that word at once visual, auditory, and gustatory. I learned again and again from this poem and others that the complex world of ideas can fall with crystalline clarity into images, that images can hold the beautiful journeying of thought, that in spite of the nearness of loss, violence, even the anguish of one's childhood family, one can and must savor. As I was pulling books off my shelves this week and rereading, I was surprised to find in the back pages of Human Wishes from 1989 that I had roughly scrawled out a poem about a woman sitting at a window in the rain in the back pages. As Kunitz has said, words beget words, poems beget poems. So thank you for that one. I know I'm risking going on too long, but I will risk it because this poet has been as important to me as any poet, and he has shown us, as he said poetry must do, what it is to live at this time as opposed to any other. Time and Materials came out in 2007 with its remarkable State of the Planet, in which Hass, as environmental educator, finds in the figure of a young schoolgirl carrying a red satchel the balancing counterpoint to his documentation of where we stand in the long story of Earth. Poetry should be able to comprehend the earth, to set aside from time to time its natural idioms of ardor and revulsion, and say in a style as sober as Lucretius, something of the earth beyond our human dramas. In his most recent book, Summer Snow, he writes a brilliant series of poems for the dead, not about death as an abstraction, but individuals who died as infants, children, youths, the poets lost, the victims of the Pulse nightclub shooting. Death, a somber and dignified presence, a figure of some authority. I know that it's easy for a wall of emotional protection to fall inside us thinking about the dead, but there is comfort in bringing to them the exercise of empathy that is at the heart of so much of Hass's work. Finally, let me bring us to the matter of this afternoon, in which Bob Hass will present a new collection of poets by the great Nobel Prize-winning poet Czeslaw Milosz. There's a poem in Summer Snow titled An Argument About Poetics Imagined at Squaw Valley After a Night Walking Under the Mountain, in which it's crystal clear that the long collaboration and friendship between Hass and Milosz did not end with his death. The poem welcomes Milosz to the page, along with Nietzsche, André Breton, Modigliani, and his women, armpit, nipple, a marble tomb, and a grassy hillside. So please join me in welcoming Robert Hass and the spirit of Czeslaw Milosz.
Wow, what an amazing act of generosity. Thank you so much. Thank you guys all for being here. Can you hear me? Is this okay? I was thinking about this place in the 60s. The Esquire magazine, I think it's gone, used to publish in the summer a literary map of America. And the University of Arizona Poetry Cottage showed up on it in those years. And only more so now. If you want to think of, there's Emily Dickinson's house. There's the University of Iowa, where they have show, don't tell on the bumper stickers. There's City Lights bookstore. There aren't that many places, but this amazing place is one of them. And it's, thank you, Tyler, thank you, Paola, and thank you, Allison. So Czeslaw Milosz was my neighbor. We worked on the translation of his poems for 25 years. After his death, I was quite aware that there was one set of I never learned to read Polish. I can tell whether the word cloud is in a poem or not. But I knew that there was a hole in the English presentation of his poetry. From the time that he walked out of the destruction of Warsaw by the Nazis at the end of World War II, Hitler had said, destroy it, wipe out anything that moves. As an vindictive act, the Russian army was approaching the Vistula River. 80% of the buildings in Warsaw were wiped out, 175,000 people, mostly young, killed within a couple of weeks. This is not the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, which had happened 2 years before and was part of the experience of the murder of 3 million Polish Jewish people. So he walked away from the city, which was burning, with his girlfriend, who could be his wife. They found their way to Krakow, which was intact. He applied for a job. He was 34 years old, applied for a job with the diplomatic service of the new country that was coming into being, the People's Republic of Poland, and he got a job. And he was sent to the United States because he had learned some English and translated The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, and arrived in January of 1946 in New York. So, and he stayed there for 5 years in a very awkward situation, taking in this city. One of the first letters he wrote back was, buildings this tall are nonsense. This neon is a cheap gimmick. Here was this live. Anyway, let me read you what a Polish scholar says about him at this time. After all, this poet, the future author of The Captive Mind, which is his prose book about the totalitarian imagination, this Polish citizen, after the experience of war, occupation, the imposition of a totalitarian system in his homeland, finds himself on the other end of the world where historical experience seems to shape individual and collective attitudes only to a small extent. This witness to the brutal degradation of humanity, to cruel Nazi terror, roundups on the streets, executions, the Holocaust, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943, the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, the total extermination of a city of more than 1 million residents, and the invasion of the Red Army. This poet is confronted with a society for which the war happened far away, while respect for individual rights and for fundamental principles remain where respect for individual rights and fundamental principles remained obvious and indisputable. This European, coming from the old world that was ruined and impoverished by war, finds himself in the new world which boasts of its prosperity, a far higher level of development, and forms of social and political organization little known to him. So a colleague approached me a couple of years ago and said, there's this book of his poems from 1946 through the years in Washington, during the time when he decided he just couldn't work for this government anymore, sought political asylum in France, wrote The Captive Mind to justify his leaving after being in hiding because he wasn't sure if he was going to be tracked down by the Polish government or not, and then found his way back to writing poetry after a couple of years. This period from 1946 to 53. So my friend David Frick, who died before we finished this project, said to me, let's just translate that whole book. And I thought, you can't not do this. So what I want to do for half an hour is just take you through some of this. There are 50 poems. It took us 2 years of occasional work to do it. When he fled Warsaw, he and his wife were immediately picked up by a German patrol, put in a detention camp. There were some kids playing soccer on the field next to the camp, and he wrote notes and handed them to the kids and said, would you deliver these? And to 4 or 5 people that he knew, they were still on the outskirts of Warsaw. And one of them somehow got delivered to a friend who gave it to the abbess of a convent that was right next to the detention center, and the abbess came over and pleaded Milosz's case, and he and his wife's mother, who was with them, were released from the DP camp and made their way south to Krakow. And it was in Krakow that he was able to finish up his wartime poems and apply for this job. And after a while, he came back to see what Warsaw looked like. Middle of 1945, let's say. So this is a poem called In Warsaw. What are you doing? Let me look at the time. What are you doing here, poet, on the ruins of St. John's Cathedral on this sunny day in spring? What are you thinking here where the wind blowing from the Vistula scatters the red dust of the brick rubble? You swore never to be a ritual mourner. You swore never to touch the deep wounds of your nation, so you would not make them holy with the accursed holiness that pursues descendants for generations. But The lament of Antigone, searching for her brother, is beyond the power of endurance, and the heart is a stone in which is enclosed, like an insect, the dark love of a most unhappy land. I did not want to love so. That was not my design. I did not want to pity so. That was not my design. My pen is lighter than a hummingbird's feather. This burden is too much for it to bear. How can I live in this country where the foot knocks against the unburied bones of kin? I hear voices, see smiles. I can't write anything. 5 hands seize my pen and order me to write the story of their lives and deaths. Was I born to become a ritual mourner? I wanted to sing of festivities, the greenwood into which Shakespeare often took me. Leave the poets a moment of happiness, otherwise your world will perish. It's madness to live without joy and to repeat to the dead, whose part was to be gladness of action in thought and in the flesh, was to be singing and feast, only the 2 salvaged words, truth and justice. So this is a poem he wrote before he arrived in the United States. He was flown from Warsaw to London. He actually had lunch with T.S. Eliot, Faber and Faber, because he'd read his poem. And he arrived in New York. The consulate in New York had arranged for him and his wife an apartment on the west side on about 74th Street. The consulate was on the east side at Lexington and 71st. So in January, his walk across Central Park must have been his way to work. It took a while for him. We'll get to that poem, his Central Park poem. The first poems that the poems that he wrote, first poems that he wrote in the United States are you can tell that he's first of all, he's learning this new place, but that his imagination is still in Europe. And this poem is called 2 Men in Rome. I should say that all of these poems are the poems he wrote during this period. They're all metrical. They're all rhymed. One of the reasons he didn't want to translate them was because they were all rhymed. And we would work at his poems that rhymed and try something. And he wanted them to rhyme if they rhymed in Polish. But he didn't want them to say one thing that they didn't say in Polish. I've told this story many times, but there's a poem of his from the Warriors in which a mother is telling children a good night story called Parable of a Poppy Seed. And the poem goes roughly, on a seed of poppy, there's a little house. Inside it are people and a cat. Outside in the yard, a dog who doesn't know he's on a poppy seed barks at the moon. But the model for that was William Blake's Songs of Innocence, which he was translating. So he wanted it in the rhythm of a child's song, and he wanted it to rhyme. So what I did was, on a seed of poppy is a tiny house. Inside it are people, a cat and a mouse. Outside in the yard, a dog barks at the moon, and then in his one world, sleeps until noon. The earth is a poppy seed and nothing more, and that seed's a planet, and that seed's a star, and even if there were 100,000, each would contain a house and a garden, all in a poppy head. They grow taller than hay. The children run through, and the poppy plants sway. And in the night, when the moon is aloft, you hear the dogs barking, first loud, then soft. And I thought, did I nail it? I nailed it. And he said, mouse? There is no mouse in my poem. And what kind of idiot doesn't know that poppy seeds are taller than hay? So I didn't even try with these poems. But anyway, we're back to, I was quite surprised. So he's in New York. He's learning to be a diplomat, cultural attaché. And he wrote this poem, which is very much in the style of his earliest poems, which were very influenced by French poetry, by Mallarmé and Valéry, symbolic landscapes. I don't completely understand this poem. And when you're doing this kind of translating, not with him there, but with a scholar friend, we just shrug and just try to translate it literally. Tell you as exactly as we can what we can. Two Men in Rome. The other thing I should say is he had translated Eliot's Burnt Norton, the first of the four quartets, in which, in the middle of that violence, the bombing of London, Eliot writes about the still point of the turning world, the meditative place, if it exists, in which you can step outside time. Milosz, in those years, was a sort of Hegelian Marxist, not inclined to think that you could step outside of time. But he repeats Eliot's phrase in this poem. And the cardinal in this poem is a prince of the church, not an American bird. Darkness, and Milosz had been in Rome once for a couple of weeks in 1937. So this is a guy at a desk in New York writing a poem. Darkness begins at Castle San Angelo, at the globe's still point, where the Tiber unravels time. The fading earth, touched by wind, breathes among the ashes. One can hear the rustling of a lizard, the scurrying of a mouse, and the weeping of the world. As long as blood flows in the human body and is alive with the love of other bodies, it's possible to live in joy or despair. But when the abstract void of the earth appears and the time of farewell draws near, the smell of leaves, the shape of clouds mean nothing. My coat of royal purple won't save my wrinkled hand. The pulse of time beats slowly in me now, and the quick and the dead give their one speech now and for all time to come. I've heard the demand to feel pity, but I can't summon the pity required. In our small lives, it's no more than a 5-minute walk from a child's cradle to the grave. So why should I feel pity for those who perish? Carry those small lives tenderly in the palm of my hand. In the great twilight, bent over the first cause, I quelled the pain in me and extinguished the delight. At the globe's still point, where nothing changes, there is a different compassion of a human kind, begun there where the power of memory ends in the great shining quiet of the still point. And then there's a set of stanzas in italics. The clatter of sandals in the dark, one striking on a mandolin, lengthening and fading, song of a soldier dreaming of Brooklyn and the smell of mold from the river. Let's go under the shadow of the colonnade where the fountain repeats its ancient motion, where on the stones in the weak moonlight, shapes of earth appear, having been summoned. An invisible theater floating in the air, and a lively song gathered from the summer night. Ta, ta-da, ta-da. A cardinal, looking on, pinches his ring. Beside him stands a shadow in cape and cowl. They are solitary onlookers in the darkness, and the live rise and fall of song. And back to Roman type for a set of stanzas. A poet of this epoch can't bear his face because the creases drawn by terror would be revealed. And in the moonlight, the clenched teeth, the sneer, the intricate music of words does not serve him as it served poets who aim to express ecstasy. He thinks coldly. He calculates the distance to a clearing. His dwelling has an echo in the mold of old fountains, in intermittent sighs, in rust, in a useless pen, and everything is both simultaneous and stopped. A second can open in him a spewing wound, his century the sound of a shell at the bottom of the sea. Caught between contradiction and contradiction, he produces a new choice, and what he chooses is never what it should have been. Thunder in one's hand, and in the valley the roar of the forest, a man following into a cemetery in the rocks, and nothing remains, or something, and always too little. A memory postponed to the last hour, an unnamed memory, forbidden to himself, pearls of childish tears in an avenue of maples, at dawn on the shores of lakes smoking rushes, and deeds, our sad human deeds. Then back to the italics. And there's the dancing girl. Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. From the mirrors of the night, a timid foot emerges, and bending down, her toes take the first step slowly. She draws up her knee, and her dark sex is visible, the mark distinguishing the human dead from inanimate matter through the bygone possibility of procreation. It's masked by threads of beads that sway. She throws her hands upward, and her breasts, with the dark marks from which we sucked, where we nestled with our deceased mothers, precede her flight to an invisible star. Shaggy and sunken faces look at her, motionless, millions on millions, chewing on bread crusts found in the corners of the barracks, and she soars, fluttering, while suddenly, screaming, casting her arms down, she falls headfirst in a quiet burst, like a burst of magnesium, onto the stony edge of a disused fountain. And back to the Roman type. I hear how laughter and crying rise in that night that has neither beginning or end. Accursed cardinal, let go of my hand. Do you want me to stand forever with the memory killed by that lunatic song, ready to be embalmed in gilded dust in the smoke of burning aloe? I know that one pays for that mute staring. When I was a boy chanting Ovid and dreaming of laurels on my brow, I was already swimming out on one of those somber waters where a crowd of sad figures is rushing to the incantation. Yes, I was a witness, but I was never reconciled. No one living will tear a scent from my lips. Anyone faithful won't be reconciled. If your Vatican lies broken, I will keep going to bear the windstorm, the aurea aetas, the golden age, from heart to heart. And at the end, back to the italics, the clatter of stilts, festive sound, when the procession of ragged overcoats and the whites of eyes, unmoving like the eyes of marble, when women tied their falling stockings with string and bundles were carried by a strap across the forehead, when old people mourn their final love for a wooden doll or a packet of letters. And under that it says New York City, 1946. So the other poem of the only two he wrote in that year when he was settling into this new thing, he was translating American poetry, beginning to travel. He went to New Hampshire and met Robert Frost, translated some of the poems of Wallace Stevens. Later on, he would write poems about, if I should have stayed in America, I could have become a professor of pears. Thinking of Stevens. So this poem is called Child of Europe. And I'm just going to read a little bit of it. And this is it. So that poem is very much in a symbolic mode, the one and this is trying to find a new satiric, straightforward voice. We, whose lungs fill the sweetness of day, who in May admire trees flowering, we're better than those who perished. We, who taste exotic dishes and enjoy fully the delights of love, we are better than those who perished. We, from the fiery furnace, from behind barbed wire, on which the winds of endless autumns howled, we, who remember battles when the wounded air roared in a paroxysm of pain, we saved by our own cunning and knowledge, by sending others to the more exposed positions, by urging them loudly to fight on, ourselves withdrawing in certainty that the cause was lost. Having the choice of our own death or that of a friend, we chose his, coldly thinking, let it be done quickly. We sealed gas chamber doors. We stole bread, knowing the next day would be harder to bear than the day before. As befits human beings, we explored good and evil. Our malignant wisdom has no like on this planet, except it has proven we're better than they, the gullible, hot-blooded weaklings who are careless with their lives. You get a feel of this. There can be no question of force triumphant. We live in the age of victorious justice. Don't mention force or you'll be accused of so on. You can get it. Love no country, countries soon disappear. Love no city, cities are soon rubble. Throw away keepsakes, or from your desk a choking, poisonous fume will exude. Do not love people, people soon perish, or they are wronged and call for your help. Don't gaze into the pool of the past. That corroded surface will mirror a face very different from the ones you expect, and so on, with that Child of Europe tone. So that's his first year. The second year, 1947, he tries to get on top of the materials by writing a poem to Jonathan Swift in a satirical tone. I'll read just a little of it, trying to get you through. To you I address myself, dear Dean, asking for your good advice. Since we meet infrequently, I won't close myself in glory. You can hear the da-da-da-da-da of it. I see a greenish ocean break against a rocky shore. The long white fingers of the surf set off the emerald island handsomely. A stone of dark violet shimmers over Ireland's peateries. In houses under hooting owls, barley sputters in the stew. Silver braid, a glint of wig, a goose quill pen drawing maps. Not in this way, the people think, for instruction and for art. I followed it, sign after sign, and found the shortcuts useful. I visited the Brobdingnagians, I skirted the Laputa Isles. I also met the Yahoo tribe living in their slavish fear, a cursed brood of informers who adore their excrement. My life broke into Ireland, so on. How he became Gulliver, 1947. And then he tries a very delicate waltz-like poem called Song on Porcelain, which was translated by my friend Robert Pinsky so that it does rhyme and does meter. Wrote Song on Porcelain. Rose-colored cup and saucer, flowery demi-tasse, you lie beside the river where an armored columns pass. Winds from across the meadow sprinkle the bank with down. A torn apple tree's shadow falls on the muddy path. The ground everywhere is strewn with bits of brittle froth. Of all things broken and lost, porcelain troubles me most. Before the first red tones begin to warm the sky, the earth wakes up and moans. It's the small, sad cry of cups and saucers cracking. The master's precious dream of roses, of mowers raking and shepherds on the lawn. The black underground stream swallows the frozen swan. This morning, as I pass, it's porcelain that troubles me most. The blackened plain spreads out to where the horizon blurs in a litter of handle and spout, a lively pulp that stirs and crunches under my feet. Pretty, useless foam. Your stained colors are sweet, spattered in dirty waves, flecking the black, fresh loam in the mounds of these new graves, in sorrow and pain and cost, sir. Porcelain troubles me most. And then, early spring 1947, he writes a poem called The Song of a Bird on the Banks of the Potomac. So he's beginning to, when the magnolias bloom, I should say, he was very successful. I mean, his appetite for work was really extraordinary. He was very successful in New York in the consulate, so he was transferred to the embassy in Washington, where he became the cultural attaché, which involved him promoting Polish culture in various ways, traveling with textile artists, trying to create a market for Polish textiles, took him to New Mexico, took him to California. He went to Chicago to try to set up a Polish studies program at the university. He's got a car and a driver's license. He and his wife have a child. When the magnolias bloom and the park is a splash of muddy green, I hear your song on the banks of Potomac, on evenings lulled to sleep by cherry petals. Please pardon the absence of those emotions that lead one back by force to places in springtimes long forgotten, so that poets might seduce the young with patriotic feeling, might press the longing heart, coloring the muddle of childhood and youth in a blur of tears. I find this unpleasant. Why should I recall Ponery? He grew up in Lithuania, in Vilno, and the hill where people went hiking, the Catalinas was Ponery. Why should I recall Ponery? Yellow with young leaves, with the almond scent of daphne shrubs, the calls of grouse echoing in the forest. Why should I enter again the dark halls of King Sigismund August High School, or prod the pines with a great whip on the road from Żany, where Slovakia, the Keats of Polish poetry, where Slovakia once did. We played our games on the Marozhanka, or played we were courtiers of King Vladislaw, the story of our loves and our partings, or were they the love songs of the Philomass? Philomass was a student underground club in favor of Romanticism and Polish liberation. I no longer recall that. Bird, graceful bird, you who sing to me today the same song that an Indian hunter must have heard here, standing with his bow on the deer path. How can you know of the passing of generations or the succession of forms in the course of a single life? Those traces of my youth were not effaced by the momentum of the seasons only. I was witness to misfortunes. I know what it means to cheat life with the colors of memory. I listen to your lovely tones with joy. Here on the great earth, spring is renewing, our home of a second. In it, the world's beginnings, so sing. Shower the dew of song from the banks of the Potomac onto the pearl of these ash-gray waters. Washington, 19. The other thing, you still, Am I talking into the mic? If you, wait, raise your hand if I get drifty. So, in America, the war was over. Let me skip to that poem. The Central Park poem, called Summer Movies in Central Park. He had a friend who was an anti-Stalinist Marxist in Paris, who he was writing back and forth letters to at this time. And Julius Kronsky, philosopher, who was saying to him, we don't give up on the hope of that Marx and Hegel are right, that all of this is leading inevitably to the perfect society. And Czeslaw right back, well, Movies in Central Park for Julius Kronsky in Paris. In the dim light on the trampled grasses, girls lie still with their soldiers in their arms or sailors until the image alters. Dark glance of a shoulder, an unbuttoned blouse. Trees spring from the ancient bedrock, and the spray of leaves fall like chords where nature becomes a theater. The silvery machinery of the skyline shifts. The summit of the abstract city, the summits of the abstract city quiver under murky rainbows in the humid air. Honeycomb of metal or stalactites divide the distance into sheer domains. I have to say, so I was working with David, and he would do a first translation, and I would say, I don't know what the hell this means. And he would say, I don't know what the hell it means either. So once you get what's happening, so everybody's sprawled, the young are sprawled on the lawn making out. They're seeing a summer night movie, and the flickering of the light on the palisade of the high-rises on Fifth Avenue are lit up. When nature becomes a theater, the silver machinery of the skyline shifts. The summits of the abstract city quiver under murky rainbows in the humid air. Honeycombs of metal or stalactites divide the distance into sheer domains. I remember a field where the radiance of the burning city colored the dry wormwood, and crickets played, red from the glow from which an army of smoke marches. The water rushing along the road flutters the dress on the corpse of a woman as the city descends long days and nights into legend which won't compensate for its disasters. This memory contains a warning for those who spend their nights on soft couches. An errant fire will often burn right through the rosy stains on bed sheets. Whoever enters the human cosmos where marvels are performed should know that it delivers serenely on a daily basis the retributions of malignant fate. They don't hear this, as if the fresh earth had brought forth the first palm after the flood. Trembling, they enter the quiet groves of sex and simply give themselves to each other. And yet, even here in the middle of Manhattan, I could see how, as a warning sound, their faces blanch in the glare of the screen, and sudden fright weakens their legs. Here, in the line of cars along Fifth Avenue, I see how the ambassador's limousine glides past the white masts on which the various flags of fictitious colors sway in a mild breeze. The poor envoys, their labors are great, as they, eyes asquint, compose a holy covenant with duplicitous ink, or the pact between the Athenians and the Lacedaemonians. And what sort of power was granted to us, Julius, when we foresaw the fate of our native realm, which was to be brought under the militarized feet of foreign powers. We had barely mourned in our secret hearts that Europe, mother of arts and sciences, with his old wisdom and bloody cobblestones, as we placed it on the scales opposite the new face, old Europe, new Europe, we know that the ingenuity of our weapons is disastrous, that the whirlwind shreds banners, and that the heirs to the glory of the Greek name, glory, our heritage from the Greeks, will last as long as humankind lasts. And that this age of darkness will pass the way winters pass when the strong sap rises under the brittle bark. The smiles of the sophists as in papal Rome will knock the pen from the hand of the inquisitors. Just as once upon a time, books were brought from Constantinople to the northern lands, so on. You can see he's now kicking into some imagination with his friend of how some new world is going to emerge out of this. Meanwhile, the Soviets are taking over Poland, and he knows it. And most of the Polish exiles in New York are picketing in front of the Polish embassy because Poland is going back into servitude again. And Czeslaw finds himself serving this government which is no longer tenable. And he writes a poem that gets him in such trouble that he gets recalled to Poland, and where his passport is confiscated because they think he's politically unreliable. And I've about spent my half hour. So let me read you. Here's a surprising thing. One of the poems from 1948 is called A Little Negro Girl Playing Chopin. I should remind you that Poland and Russia and the Lithuania of that time were also slave societies. The serfdom was abolished around the same time that slavery was abolished here. And all through the 18th and 19th century, Poland was divided between three empires: the Prussians, the Austrians, and the Russians. And Polish people and Polish poetry and Polish novels all had the dream of a liberated and free Poland. And the greatest expression of that hunger for freedom in the 19th century was Chopin. So here's a little black girl in America playing Chopin at some recital that this Polish diplomat is going to. He's not seen many black people. And he came to America with European prejudices about this country. Another of the first letters he wrote back, he said, the only people here with souls are the Negroes. If only you had seen her, Sir Frederick, how she places her dark fingers on the keys and diligently bends her woolly head, how she places her slender foot on the pedal, comically childlike, on a well-trodden little shoe. And when the hall suddenly grows quiet, the primrose of tone unfurls slowly. If only you had been in the hall in the semi-darkness, how her teeth glitter in her open mouth when the grand piano bears arc hairs, and how in slanting ribbons it falls from the side, and how in the hubbub of bird song through the stained glass plashes it was spring in a city unknown to you by name. It was spring in a city unknown to you by name. If only you had seen how those tones flew, pulled the dust motes into columns of sunlight over her dark face as it rested on her palm, you would have said it was worth it. That's the poem. So it was interesting in translating this poem. David, said, what are we going to do about these racial markers? Should we just leave them out in the translation? places her fingers on the keys and diligently bends her head. Leave out the dark fingers and the woolly hair. Leave out the glittering white teeth. We made versions of both, and then I thought, I guess what I should do, thinking of Czeslaw saying, mouse, I better just translate what's there and let people deal with it. So there's a poem called Three Choruses from an Unwritten Drama entitled Hiroshima, written in 1948. But I've taken my time. So I bring you to Europe. The long poem that he wrote in 1948, which was the main reason we translated this book, was called Traktat Moralny, Treatise on Morals. Later, he wrote one of what people think his greatest poem is called Treatise on Poetry. And then in the years just before his death, he wrote a treatise on theology, coming back to something he wrestled with all his life, which is, if there is no God, who decides good and evil? So this early poem called Traktat Moralny, also impossible because it's written in rhymed couplets. It was an imitation of a poem of Auden, written in rhymed couplets, and as they described to me, the rhythm of a Krakow cabaret song. And its subject is what happens now, after. You can see that now is the memory of this violence, the survival guilt, all of it, what's there. And the poem, his book of poems from the war was called Osalani, which means rescue or salvation, something like that. So this poem, Traktat Moralny, begins in quotation marks. So just what, O poet, did you propose to save? Can anything save the earth? This so-called dawn of peace, what has it given us? A few morning glories among the ashes. It gave hope bile, the heart cunning, and I doubt it's aroused much pity, is how this begins. So this is my subject for today. From you, it will require the discipline of paring things down. And then he launches into a 12-page, 400-line poem in rhymed couplets. David, when he was translating with me, was laughing at the rhymes because he would rhyme really a crude word with a highbrow word and so on. At the center of the poem, he says, well, that's what's really come out of the war are three things as far as morals are concerned. Existentialism, phenomenology, and vodka. And he takes up each subject. And I won't, I can give you a little flavor of it. I know what sort of temptation awaits us. The new march sets off jauntily. The posthumous hiccup of Heidelberg, home of origin of phenomenology. The solace of despairing intellectuals. In spite of all, the ding on six still lingers on in them. So, lost amidst the chaos, they have grasped at the new manner, and wishing to have something that lasts, they jump on Sartre, être pour soi. I will gladly give them the palm of glory, but these things are not to be had, since no one from that formation is likely to get off of this train at some station to amuse himself pleasantly with a butterfly for catching being and non-being. And you get the tone. The part, just give a little of the flavor of it, the part about vodka, which is quite striking. You have probably already noticed I stress your way of life, since this is where you spend your time. So, my people, Let's talk about alcohol. Poland bows down in difficult times with little jokes and anecdotes before the idols of vodka and kielbasa, nostalgic for the mead of the old nobility, and before tears and after tears, it reels in Slavonic fashion, and toting up its poverty and hiccups finds a multitude of reasons for boasting. The phenomenon of vodka is interesting. It would be worth a dissertation. Of all drinks, vodka alone is akin to the fumes of extermination. In it, you can see the shimmer of burning cities. Through its thin glass, the convicts go, and when the houses hiss at night, and the fire is a pupil in the eyes of the windows, the brothers Karamazov, with glim faces, have sat down to a lit leader, and the smell of formic acid rises from an ant-heap and grows stronger in the summer heat. So the odor from these misfortunate lands gives a signal to travelers coming from afar. And although it may seem strange to you that I waste my time and energy making verse about this non-compulsory ego, the question, though not primary, matters. Attend to it. So see the tone of this poem. The other part of the poem is don't trust bureaucrats, and that was what got him in trouble. So he got back to Warsaw. He had his passport confiscated. One of the leaders of the new government was married to a woman who he had dated when he was a young man. And through her intercession, he got his passport back and was assigned to Paris. And he went to Paris and immediately asked for political asylum and was gone. His wife and child were still in the United States. And it was 2 years before they were able to get back together. He was in a pretty desperate condition. And then, at a certain point, he'd written the book about his defection. And I'll finish with this poem called Mittelbergheim. He finally gets to take a vacation. Mittelbergheim. Wine sleeps in casks of Rhine oak. I'm awakened by the bell of a chapel in the vineyards of Mittelbergheim. I hear a small spring trickling into a well in the yard, a clatter of wooden shoes in the street, tobacco drying under the eaves, and plows and wooden wheels and mountain slopes and autumn are with me. I keep my eyes closed. Don't rush me, you, fire, power, might, for it's too early. I've lived through many years, and as in this half-dream, I felt I was attaining the moving frontier beyond which color and sound come true, and the things of this earth are united. Do not force me to open my lips. Let me trust and believe I will find my way. Let me linger here in Mittelbergheim. I know I should. They are with me, autumn and wooden wheels and tobacco hung under the eaves. Here and everywhere is my homeland. Wherever I turn, and is whatever language I would hear the song of a child in, the conversation of lovers. Happier than anyone, I am to receive a glance, a smile, a star, silk creased at the knee, serene, beholding. I am to walk on hills, the soft glow of day over waters, cities, roads, human customs. Fire, power, might, you who hold me in the palm of your hand, whose furrows are the immense gorges combed by southern wind, you who grant certainty in the hour of fear, in the week of doubt. It is too early. Let the wine mature. Let the travelers sleep in Mittelbergheim. Alsace, 1951. So that's some of this book. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. Is there time for?
Bob, when does that book come out? In a year. You got a preview. One more round of applause for Robert Hass. There are books for sale over here that are out now. Come and buy them, and then come visit and come have them signed. We hope to see you again at events that are coming up at the Poetry Center that I mentioned before. Thanks again, everybody, for being here. Tremendous to see you all. We'll see you again soon.